Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. When it comes to Latin American drug traffickers, I feel we all naturally think of the likes of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and the legendary Pablo Escobar. They encapsulate the stereotypical image of what we expect a drug trafficker to be: decadent, charismatic leaders with a capacity for violence, as well as being cults of personality. One figure who fits this mold more so than anybody, however, would be Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, who also went by various aliases, such as El Chayo, but the world would come to know him as El Mas Loco, the craziest one. He wasn't just a drug trafficker hiding in the mountains of Michoacan, he was a preacher with a rifle, a mystic with a kill list. Nazario Moreno Gonzalez didn't rule through silence or suits. He ruled through sermons, handwritten commandments, and a warped sense of divine mission. To his followers, he wasn't merely a boss issuing orders. He was a moral guide, quoting scripture, blending folk religion with evangelical language, and framing violence as something sacred, even necessary. That's what sets Nazario apart from so many other cartel leaders. While others chased wealth, anonymity, or brute control, Moreno chased meaning. He wrote pamphlets, demanded discipline, banned drugs among his men, and he spoke endlessly about faith, sacrifice, and destiny. The organisation he led didn't just traffic drugs, it believed in his teachings. And in the space between devotion and fear, between prayer and brutality, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez built something that looked less like a cartel, and more like a movement, or dare I say cult. Nazario Moreno Gonzalez was born on March 8, 1970, in a small village on the outside of Apatzingan in Michoacan state. Nazario was actually one of 13 children in a large family who struggled to get by. Nazario's early life isn't that well documented, but it was said to be troubled. Nazario's father, who was in his life during his early years, was said to be a drunk, as well as unfaithful to his wife, Nazario's mother. One day, whilst Nazario was still a toddler, his father just upped and left one day, never returning, leaving Nazario's mother to raise 13 children alone. Naturally, things were tough and the family were poverty-stricken. With many children within the family, the kids ditched school early in order to work. The kids were raised in a very strict environment, with Nazario's mother being a devout Catholic. According to his autobiography, Moreno Gonzalez had a love-hate relationship with his mother. As a child, he was frequently beaten by his mother for being troublesome and getting into fights. On one occasion, he recalled that his mother once forced him to make his way back to his house by walking on his knees while keeping his arms stretched out like a cross throughout the whole day for stealing an animal. He later argued that such an upbringing was what made him resentful and was partly the reason for his violent ways as an adult. Truth be told, however, Nazario displayed violent tendencies from a very young age. He admitted that he often got into fistfights with other kids from the area and surrounding villages. Moreno Gonzalez recalled that he would not always win, and that once he got into 10 fights in a single day. His violent reputation as a child helped him earn the nickname El Mas Loco, the craziest one, which he held onto for the rest of his life. During his early life, Nazario rarely, if ever, attended school, and was illiterate for some years of his early life. He actually taught himself how to read and write, reportedly out of curiosity, after seeing and hearing about comic books of the stories of Caliman on the local radio station. In his writings, Moreno Gonzalez said that as a child, he believed he had the superhuman ability of speaking telepathically with animals like Caliman did in the comics. He said that he wanted to be a hero like the comic book characters. While still in his formative years, Nazario would often see armed gunmen patrol the streets, and he viewed them positively. He had a fascination with war and battles growing up, often playing Las Garritas or in English war games for fun. While playing the game, he often pretended to be dead, only to say later on that he had been wounded in the game, but had managed to survive. At around the age of 12, El Mas Loco moved to the city of Apatzingan in Michoacan state, and he entered the workforce. He held numerous jobs throughout his youth, not shy of hard work. He made a living by selling matches, peeling onions, working at a melon field, and even throwing out the trash from several booths at a marketplace. During the late 1980s, whilst Nazario was a teenager, he realised that his future in Mexico looked bleak, and like so many others at the time, he relocated to the USA illegally in search of a better existence. He eventually settled in California, where he did menial work, but after a while, he began selling weed on a small scale. Despite being raised a strict Catholic, whilst in the USA, Nazario actually became a Jehovah's Witness. While in California, it has also been alleged that Nazario was involved in several shootouts with rival dealers. After a while, Nazario moved to Texas, where he resumed his weed dealing and also became involved in more illicit drugs such as cocaine, and he began to dip his toes into the trafficking world. In 1994, a 24-year-old Nazario was then arrested by police on drug trafficking charges. It's actually unclear what happened with this arrest, as throughout the 1990s Nazario continued to spend large amounts of time in McAllen, Texas, where he ran a large-scale distribution cell, where he also worked alongside a trafficker based in Mexico by the name of Carlos Rosales Mendoza, who was primarily known for pushing crystal meth, but also cocaine and heroin. Carlos Rosales Mendoza at the time of the late 1990s was based in Michoacan, and he ran a group at the time who were known as La Empresa, or in English, The Company. He also worked closely alongside the Milenio Cartel, who also operated in Michoacan. Carlos Rosales Mendoza also had a close friendship with Osiel Cardenas, who would become the leader of the Gulf Cartel in the late 90s. So essentially, Carlos Rosales Mendoza was a heavyweight trafficker. He had key alliances that were fruitful, and an effective distribution network, and he was one of the few at the time in Mexico who had an understanding of crystal meth and its production. By the early 2000s, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, who throughout his stint in the USA developed a serious drinking problem, was also sought out by the authorities by this point. While spending long lonely nights in safe houses across Texas, he picked up a newly released book at the time called Wild at Heart by Christian author John Eldredge. The book is more of a self-help manual, more so than a religious book, promoting a more traditional masculine lifestyle. It's said that this book is what motivated Gonzalez to quit drinking, and it transcended him into a more spiritual direction. By the early 2000s, Nazario was spending more time in Mexico, in his native Michoacan, and he became ingratiated with the hierarchy of La Empresa, and he became close with leader Carlos Rosales Mendoza. By 2002, things were looking rosy for La Empresa. Their alliances with the Gulf Cartel and the Milenio Cartel were both fruitful and functional. Its leader, Carlos Rosales Mendoza, began a relationship with Inés Oseguera, the cousin of a top Milenio Cartel lieutenant, who went by the moniker of El Mencho. However, Inés began an affair and cheated on Carlos Rosales Mendoza with the leader of the Milenio Cartel, Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka El Maradona. Carlos Rosales Mendoza found out about the affair and was immediately consumed with rage, pledging to get revenge on the Valencia clan. Backed by the Gulf Cartel, Rosales turned against the Milenio Cartel, promising bounties for anyone who could kill a member of the Valencia family, including their dogs. This conflict quickly escalated in 2002 when Osiel Cardenas unleashed his elite hit squad, the Zetas, on the Valencia's operations in Michoacan. The Zetas also trained gunmen belonging to Rosales Mendoza, which was beneficial as many of the Zeta Comandantes were former soldiers. Around this time, it was when La Empresa rebranded into La Familia Michoacana. Ultimately, the Milenio Cartel were kicked out of Michoacan, and they were exiled to Jalisco. They hadn't faced an enemy as brutal and capable as the Zetas, and they couldn't compete with their manpower, firepower, or tactics. They just didn't have the alliances that La Familia did. In 2003, however, Gulf Cartel boss Osiel Cardenas was arrested by the feds, so his grip on the Gulf Cartel's elite armed wing, Los Zetas, was less firm. And in 2003, the Zetas started to take liberties in Michoacan state. They started to throw their weight around, harassing and victimizing civilians, but in particular women. This angered the higher-ups within La Familia Michoacana, including Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, who by this time was leaning further into his spiritual beliefs. In Apatzingan, Moreno Gonzalez preached to the poor and always carried a Bible with him. With time, he won the loyalty of several locals, and many started to see him as a messiah for preaching religious principles, and he was credited by locals of being a founder of La Familia Michoacana, who many locals viewed as being on their side. When Carlos Rosales Mendoza was arrested in 2004, Moreno Gonzalez ascended throughout the La Familia hierarchy, and alongside Jose de Jesus Mendez Vargas, aka El Chango, he became co-leader of the organisation. In 2006, El Chango and El Mas Loco agreed that it was time to oust the Zetas from Michoacan. They wanted the state for themselves. They ran a sophisticated propaganda campaign against the Zetas which honestly contained a lot of truth. They painted the Zetas to be outsiders, who were taking advantage of the people of Michoacan and being victimizers, and the locals of Michoacan were fully on board with this messaging. As a result, La Familia had a huge advantage on the ground. Because of the cooperation with locals, La Familia had eyes and ears everywhere, which the Zetas, despite how brutal they were, struggled to contend with. Ultimately, it's intelligence that wins wars. The war was made official when in 2006, La Familia gunmen tossed 5 human heads on a discotheque dance floor in Michoacan. Near the severed heads lay a message that read the following: La Familia doesn't kill for money, it doesn't kill women, it doesn't kill innocents. Only those who deserve to die will die. After a brutal war, the Zetas were successfully defeated by La Familia, which at the time was a big feat because the Zetas, by this point, hadn't really lost to anybody. With full control of Michoacan, La Familia gained a huge advantage in the crystal meth business, and this catapulted them into becoming one of the most successful and most powerful cartels in Mexico. Whilst leader of La Familia, Nazario Moreno had started to write his own literature, including his quasi-autobiography, as well as a religious Bible-type booklet which contained commandments for members of La Familia Michoacana. Moreno Gonzalez required his men to carry a spiritual manual that he wrote himself, containing pseudo-Christian messages for self-improvement. In his Bible, Moreno Gonzalez prohibited his men from consuming alcohol or other drugs, and stated that he would severely punish those who mistreated women. His writings encouraged the corporal punishment of thieves by beating them and making them walk naked with billboards in the city streets. He prohibited members of his cartel from consuming or selling methamphetamine in Michoacan, arguing that the drug was only to be smuggled into the USA for American customers. Moreno Gonzalez essentially justified his drug trafficking by stating that La Familia Michoacana regulated the drug trade to prevent exploitation of the people of Michoacan. The book, sometimes known as the Sayings of the Craziest One, also talks about humility, service, wisdom, brotherhood, courage, and God. His second book, titled They Call Me the Craziest One, is 13 chapters long, and it talks about his life, idealism, the origins of La Familia Michoacana, their battle against Los Zetas, and his rationale for joining organised crime. The text essentially reads like a diary and justifies his criminal activities under the rationale that, just like others in Michoacan, the limited opportunities and his poor financial situation pushed him to get involved in the drug trade. In addition, Gonzalez blamed the government for the existence of criminals and cartels. By the way, if anyone listening has a link to the book, please do get in touch, as I've wanted to read it for a long time. Apparently several thousand copies were printed, though it's actually on the banned book list in Mexico, so it's hard to track down a copy, certainly a physical copy, but even an online copy. During his time leading La Familia, Nazario would also be keen to conduct charity work and make monetary contributions to various causes. Moreno Gonzalez reportedly gave loans to farmers, funded schools and churches, financed drainage projects, and carried out several aid campaigns to help out the poor and downtrodden in the state of Michoacan. This, along with the manpower of the organisation, allowed him to get the support of several rural sectors in the state, where many served as informants and collaborators for the cartel. Nazario's wife at the time was also known to organise self-help events in Apatzingan, helping those with addiction issues. As a leader of La Familia Michoacana, Gonzalez was in charge of forging alliances with other cartels. He reportedly met with several cartel leaders, including Fernando Sanchez Arellano of the Tijuana cartel, Juan Jose Esparragoza Moreno of the Sinaloa cartel, and Antonio Cardenas of the Gulf cartel, who by 2010 were at war with the Zetas and once again allied to La Familia. Several agreements were forged with other cartels by Nazario, and this followed La Familia Michoacana to move drugs freely in their territories in exchange for their support in fighting off rival gangs such as Los Zetas. In 2008, for example, Moreno Gonzalez agreed to send armed men to help Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Mayo Zambada to fight off rival cartels, a favour which granted him access to the drug corridors in Sinaloa and Sonora. In addition, his friendship with the new Gulf cartel leader, Jorge Eduardo Castilla Sanchez, allowed him access to the northeastern state of Tamaulipas. However, the story for Nazario ended during December of 2010, at least according to the Mexican government at the time. On December the 9th, 2010, the Mexican Federal Police surrounded the village of El Alcalde in Apatzingan, Michoacan, with more than 2,000 officers. Reportedly, Moreno Gonzalez was at a local festival handing out Christmas presents to villagers when he was tracked down by the authorities. As the police troops drove into town, gunmen of La Familia Michoacana blocked the entrances with more than 40 burning trucks and cars. La Familia gunmen also surrounded the state capital of Morelia in an attempt to prevent the police from receiving reinforcements. The shootout lasted nearly 2 days, and at least 11 deaths were confirmed. During the gun battle, the gunmen managed to carry out the bodies of their fallen comrades up the hills. The government reported at the time that Moreno Gonzalez had been killed, but that the cartel took his body away. After his death was announced by the authorities, reports of sightings of the apparently deceased drug baron became more and more prevalent. Some of the reports suggested that he was still preaching to villagers, which donned him a new nickname, Saint Nazario. Despite the sightings and growing rumours that he was still alive, the Mexican government again reiterated that he was dead. Elias Alvarez, the commander of the 2010 police operation, said Gonzalez's grave was in the mountains but wasn't any more specific than that. 2014 reports from the Mexican government appealed to the idea that he was actually still alive, admitting that it was possible that Moreno Gonzalez was possibly injured but not killed during the shootout. For 4 years, the drug lord took advantage of the government's mistake to fall off the authorities' radar, and he continued to command the cartel from behind the scenes. A few days after his 2010 death, several people carried out a peace march in Apatzingan, expressing their support for the cartel with banners that read, "Nazario will always live in our hearts," among others. Others protested against the presence of the federal forces in the state and argued that the federal government, not the cartels, were responsible for increasing the violence in the country. After Moreno Gonzalez was reported dead, Jose de Jesus Mendez Vargas took the lead of La Familia Michoacana. The other cartel leader, Servando Gomez Martinez, aka La Tuta, fought Mendez Vargas for control of the group, but eventually he formed his own cartel, known as the Knights Templar, a drug cartel and a pseudo-religious splinter group. Since its creation, the Knights Templar cartel became a greater security concern for the Mexican government. It began to extort lime farmers, cutters and packers, as well as people who worked in the avocado business in Michoacan. The cartel also stole minerals from the state's reserves to later ship to China for sale on the black market. Killings, extortions, kidnappings and arson attacks against Michoacan residents and local businesses increased. The Knights Templar also started a war with La Familia Michoacana at this time for control of Michoacan state. Given that Moreno Gonzalez's body was never recovered from the 2010 shootout, where officials said that he was killed, there were rumours that he was still alive and secretly leading the new Knights Templar cartel, the split-off group of La Familia Michoacana. In 2011, members of La Familia set up several public banners throughout the state of Guerrero with written messages directed to the former president, Felipe Calderón. The banners proclaimed that Moreno Gonzalez was in fact alive and leading the Knights Templar cartel, and that the government was allegedly covering him up. The rumours were immediately denied by the Mexican government. Rumours sparked again in October 2011 following the arrest of Mario Queiroz, a drug trafficker who headed a Mexico City-based gang known as Los Oboites. In a videotaped police confession, he told authorities that Moreno Gonzalez was still alive and leading the Knights Templar cartel. Many Michoacan natives believed that Moreno Gonzalez was alive. He was widely believed to have made a public appearance in Morelia in 2012 after his son was killed in a motorcycle accident. According to an unnamed official, his sister went to the morgue to reclaim the body of his son before the autopsy. Those involved in the crash who killed Nazario's son were captured by Knights Templar gunmen before being tortured and murdered. In January of 2014, Gregorio Lopez, a priest of Apatzingan, reported that Moreno Gonzalez had ordered a self-imposed curfew in the city and threatened to burn down businesses that did not comply with the order. That week, Michoacan had a series of violent episodes after the state's autodefensa groups, who emerged the year prior specifically to fight against the Knights Templar, attempted to move into several municipalities to fight the cartel. The priest said in an interview that there were rumours that the drug lord met with La Tuta for lunch in a ranch outside of Apatzingan. The mysticism and spiritual teachings of the drug lord played an important role in the Knights Templar cartel's propaganda and recruitment in Michoacan. By spreading such rumours that he was alive, the cartel hoped to gain a level of consensus from the public in their fight against the self-defense militias as well as the state police. In the region of Apatzingan, people created altars with statues and photos to honour him. The figurines are often dressed in tunics similar to the Knights Templar and had prayers calling him Saint Nazario. Reformer newspaper reported that Moreno Gonzalez had his own prayer: "O Lord Almighty, free me from all sins, give me protection through Saint Nazario." These altars are still found in the village of Holanda on the hill of El Cerrito de la Cruz, and also in Apatzingan. Villagers have noted that they had previously been forced to venerate the criminal under the threat of armed force by the gang members. The areas where many altars were located were reportedly patrolled for several years by a group known as the 12 Apostles, who were Nazario Moreno's security team. In March of 2014, the rumours of Nazario's continued existence were proven true. At around 7 AM on 9th of March 2014, the Mexican Army and Navy pinpointed Moreno Gonzalez's whereabouts in Tumbescatio, Michoacan. When they tried to apprehend him, the drug lord opened fire at the security forces before being killed in the fire exchange. Mexican authorities officially confirmed his identity through DNA examinations and fingerprint identification. The results were consistent with the law enforcement files already on record. While investigators conducted the autopsy at a hospital in Apatzingan, more than 150 law enforcement officers from the Army, Navy and Federal Police and the PGR cordoned the area to prevent organised crime members from attempting to steal his body. The cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. On the evening of the 14th of March 2014, his corpse was handed over to his sister and 2 nephews in Morelia by state authorities. His family and friends held a funeral for him at the Santa Cruz Funeral Home in Altozano, Morelia. They did not comment where the corpse was to be taken, but unconfirmed reports suggested that there were plans to cremate him and scatter his ashes at a village in the Tierra Caliente region in Michoacan. Following his death, Servando Gomez Martinez would then take full control of the Knights Templar criminal empire, who by this point had decimated La Familia Michoacana. To this day, shrines dedicated to Moreno Gonzalez can still be found, dotted around the rural areas of Michoacan. In fact, there's some who even speculate that he could still be alive. To some he is El Mas Loco, to others he is Saint Nazario. He was a trafficker who blurred the lines between criminal and vigilante, a greedy bloodthirsty trafficker, and a Robin Hood type figure. Without doubt, whilst using his second life, for lack of a better term, he was far more violent whilst he was leader of the Knights Templar cartel than he was in his first life, leading La Familia. From 2010 to 2014, his organisation were far more guilty of exploiting and victimising innocent people on a wider scale. Regardless, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, aka El Mas Loco, the craziest one, is arguably, in my opinion, at least one of, if not the most fascinating Mexican trafficker of his time. How a movie or a series hasn't been made about the man is beyond me, as ultimately the subject matter is there. But anyway, that is the story of El Mas Loco. As always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.